I'm Belinda Shipp, and I'm really honoured to be talking to Cathy McIntosh, my dear friend and author of Redemption Echo. So, good morning, Cathy.
Good morning. Good morning.
I've read Redemption's Echo and I loved it from start to finish. It had me absolutely gripped. So, just to start with, can you just talk to us a little bit about what inspired you to write this book in the first place?
My husband's in law enforcement, has been for over 35 years. And the inspiration really came from a true case that happened within the county where we live. It was a young woman who was found murdered in a field, and there was a period of time where they couldn't identify her. And quite honestly, for our faith-based listeners, as my husband was talking to detectives on the phone, I was just standing beside him listening. And I felt the whisper of God say, pay attention, Cathy, I want you to write about this one. And that's been almost 6 years. And so it's just been bubbling and brewing inside of me until it finally came out as a fiction novel. But the true inspiration for the novel came from a true story.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So, can you just give us a quick, brief synopsis, if I can say the word, synopsis about what the story is about?
Certainly. It's about two sisters who are growing up in a very tumultuous, very trauma-filled childhood. And one sister is killed. The other sister becomes a detective and has to confront her traumatic past in order to solve the cold case of her sister's murder.
Fantastic, fantastic. But that's quite a complex. Having read the book, quite a complex plot for you to navigate. And you have said your husband's in law enforcement, but
yes,
how did you manage to keep that story through from start, middle, finish, end, so that you sort of did this wonderful job of pulling the reader through every stage of that journey?
Yeah, it was very complicated, and to be honest, it took me a lot of years to finally get to a plot that I thought was realistic enough to put into print. So I had a lot of ideas along the way, and I would run them by my husband. I would talk to a few other law enforcement officers that I know, and it was like, yeah, that's good, that will work. And it just didn't cement in my heart. And then as I just kept plotting and planning and just asking questions inside my own head, finally the whole plot just kind of came forward, and it smoothed itself out, and all the details were covered, and all of a sudden I had law enforcement officers that weren't saying, yeah, that's good, it will work. They were saying, oh my gosh, I'm fully engaged, I need to know what happens. And then I knew I was on something.
That feels like that's quite a journey for yourself, and I'm guessing it's one that lots of authors go through, in that kind of not having it quite right to getting it or feeling that it's right. Can you talk me through? Because I'm feeling if I was in your position, it'd be easy to sort of give up, think, oh, I just can't get it right. I'm just not feeling the solution. So how did you work your way through that one?
That's spot on, Belinda, because there were many times I'm thinking, this just doesn't even work. This is just not even a good idea. I just need to put it away and move on. And once I feel like the actual plot was downloaded in an instant. I was doing something else, and all of a sudden this plot just came, and I was running through the house trying to find pen and paper to write it all down, because I knew this was good. Then I started showing it to other people, and just got that confirmation. But until that point where it was like putting a puzzle together in my mind, and it took a long period of time, I would say a couple of years, to finally get it to where it was refined enough to be an actual story that had all the great elements of a story that can draw people in and help them see themselves as a hero, and just put themselves into the nature of the crime and the nature of solving that crime. It was really more about patience and perseverance, and not giving up on an idea that I knew in my heart was a good one. I just needed to get it refined enough to act on it.
That's amazing. I think for me, that's so inspiring to hear. So inspiring to hear. And you talked there about the sort of seeing yourself in the hero. Talk to me about some of those characters that you perhaps particularly related to. Did you mold them on other things that you know in your life? How did you go about developing some of those really strong purposeful characters that you have in your book?
The hero of the story is a female detective, and I drew a lot on just, I feel like I had like osmosis through my husband's law enforcement career. And I've just been involved with so many different law enforcement officers and just admiring their work and watching detectives work 24/7 on a case and not come home to their families for days and days on end because they're having to work this case. So I drew on what I knew about the profession, and I really wanted to make it a strong female character who struggled with insecurity, who is a real person who isn't perfect and doesn't see herself as perfect. In fact, she only sees all the flaws within herself. And I tried to develop that into someone who confronts her fears and moves forward through them to do the good work that she's called to do. So that's the main hero. The character that I had the most fun writing was the hero's best friend, who's Mackenzie, and they call her Mac. She was a combination of my daughter and one of my dearest friends, and to be able to create her in a way that's fun and sassy and doesn't take herself so seriously, and she's confident. It's kind of the polar opposite of our hero, and I think that those two characters just meshed together beautifully, and it was just a fun relationship to put into words.
I love that. I love that. And you talked about developing characters that you relate to. How does your faith influence both the story and the characters that you built up?
I am a strong woman of faith, and I did not necessarily want this to be a Christian book per se, because it deals with some very hard hitting topics like human trafficking and homicide and all of those things we would rather weren't in our world, but they certainly are. So it's not necessarily a Christian book, but the main character has a Christian worldview, and she acts on her faith. So some of her practices, some of her daily routines involve some of the same practices that I enjoy in my life every day. So it's not that it's a Christian book, but the main character is a Christian, and she plays that out, and you see that come to fruition throughout the story. And I think that's a more realistic aspect. My husband and I have talked for a long time, many years, about how hard it would be to face the difficulties that a law enforcement officer faces every day without a measure of faith. Like how do you not just give up on the world when there's not a source of good that lives within you? You would start to be so cynical and just see the whole world as a horrible, evil, rotten place. And to have that faith as a justice professional really helps keep someone grounded and keeps their hope and their assurance alive inside their hearts. So I hope that played out inside the story.
And I think it really did. I think it. I think it really did. And I suppose on that front, is there something specific that you want your readers to sort of think or feel or take away once they finish reading Redemption?
Certainly. And I'll tell you that I did not have this in mind when I started the book, but as the book progressed, for me, it became a story about the misunderstandings of human trafficking and what actually goes on in the real world. And a lot of times we as a society see people who are addicted to drugs or involved in prostitution, and we think, wow, those people should have made different choices. They should never have gone down that road. It's really easy for someone who doesn't struggle to look at someone else and not understand what they're going through. And so what I hope that this book brings to light is, for each one of us, there are a series of circumstances that brought us to the place that we are and led us to the decisions that we made, or to the circumstances that we had to navigate and had no clue how to make decisions appropriately. So it's really about looking at people differently and having a kinder, softer heart, and starting to understand the situations that lead people to the place where they are right now. One of the things about human trafficking is you don't even have to leave your house. You can be trafficked inside the safety of your own home. And that's just a genuine reality. And I hope that there's some awareness that's raised through a story like Redemption's Echo.
That's perfect. That's perfect. And I think it really is. I think you can really see that throughout the story. And certainly that empathy that I felt for those two main characters. I think you've managed to portray that really beautifully
Thank you. Thank you.
throughout. So I'm sort of interested because it feels like there's a really fine line that you've had to tread between sort of that out and out, harsh, gritty, quite horrific thriller, as
Mhm.
or psychological thriller rather, which we read, which can be, you know, yeah, very detailed, very, yeah, horrific really, and quite triggering perhaps to read for some.
Yes.
But doing this, how did you do that and sort of have a mind to your faith and have a mind to the integrity of the people that you were writing about? What is it that's different that you've written?
Yeah, I do think there are a lot of murder mysteries or books that involve some of the issues that come out in Redemption's Echo, and they are graphic. Like you said, they're gritty. They get into the weeds of what's actually going on. And I tried to paint that picture in a much softer brush, keeping in mind that there will be people who read this book that have their own traumatic experiences. And the last thing I want to do is trigger anyone. I'm sure that this book will trigger some. I do put a content warning on my website about it because I want people to be careful and to read it with caution. But I did try to generalize what needs to be generalized, but still stay true enough to the reality of what happens in the world to get the point across. So um, it was a tough challenge. I was very surprised that I had written one of my villains and sent it off to a developmental editor, and she basically said he's not mean enough. You need to bring it out some more. And so that was hard. That was for me to go make him meaner and be a little bit more graphic with some of the information that I shared. But then when I got feedback from one of my beta readers, he's a detective captain, and he said, I hated that villain so much. He made my skin crawl. I just hated this man. And I knew I was onto something and that I had hit it. Again, I had the help of many people on the outside who were reading it, giving me feedback. That's too soft. It's too hard. This part really doesn't add to the story. So just very cautiously moving forward with what kind of information I shared and to what degree and what level.
See, that's really fascinating. So can you just build on that really? Talk talk to me about that editing process. You've touched on that you had an editor said one thing, you had a detective captain, excuse me,
Sure.
some other feedback. How do you one go out and get to the feedback? Because I think that's be really useful. How did you know what to take? Because you've got to have a lot. If you ask 10 people 10 different opinions, you're going to get 10 different opinions.
Yes.
And for me, that feels like that could be quite overwhelming. So how did you
Yeah.
manage that?
It definitely could be. And so that most of the editors were part of the publishing process. My copy editor is a friend of mine. We worked as editors together on the Joyful Life magazine, and I asked her to do the copy editing for my book. And she's actually the wife of a pastor. She's just a beautiful human, and I love her to pieces. And so she had that perspective from the faith world. Is this too much? Is it not enough? So she was giving me the nods or maybe this could look a little bit differently. And she would say things like, how would it look if such and such happened? And so she would toss out a nugget for me to consider. And then the developmental editors more black and white. One of them said, you need to paint this with a very soft hand. And so I definitely ran with that. And then as I said, the other editor said, this character's not mean enough. You need to liven it up. And there are definitely times when the editors themselves did not agree with one another. And so then I had to do what I thought was best for the readers that I know and the people that I know, and stay true to law enforcement, stay true to fact, stay true to what really goes on in the world, and try to present it in a way that I just had to make the ultimate decision. This is my book, and this is how I think that it needs to be portrayed. So bottom line, it had to be my heart that's on the line, right? It's my name on the cover of the book. But I did have a lot of influence and a lot of help telling me how different people perceive the work at different stages in life. I had people that are strongly faith-based and people that were not at all faith-based reading this book and telling me all kinds of different information. So it was extremely helpful to have a team of beta readers who I selected very carefully, and the editors coming together to give me their 2 cents. And then finally, I had to be the one that makes the ultimate decision.
That's brilliant. That's really insightful. Thank you. And I'm assuming from what you've just said that you would always recommend having both of those different types of sets of feedback, so from both the beta readers and from the editors. Is that right?
Definitely. I can't imagine ever having a piece of work published without having it go through an editing process. The editing process can be discouraging, it can be challenging, it can rip you apart. It's like handing over a baby to someone and saying, is my baby beautiful or is it ugly? And so when they start telling you, well, this is like, you don't even know how to use a comma, Kathy. Okay, that's true. But let's fix it together. So you can look at the editing process as something that tears apart your work, but I choose to look at the editing process more as a team of people who are working together to polish a piece of writing so that it can deliver the best reader experience possible to the readers. And so we're doing hard work behind the scenes so that when it's presented to the public, it can be something that we're all proud of and that we've all worked really hard on. And it's better because all of those influences were involved in it.
That's perfect. And that makes total sense. Thank you. Can I rewind you a little bit to something that you just said earlier that just sort of struck a note with me, and I'd like your thought on really. You said that it was up to you, which as the author, to decide what was best for your readers. So when you were writing this, did you have a particular reader in mind? Were you writing for a single person, or how did you decide who you were writing for?
I knew that I was going after people who enjoy crime stories, right? This is a mystery. Not everyone is going to want to read a detective novel. I know how much I enjoy detective novels, and I've read a lot of them. And so it was me as a person of faith trying to, what was hard for me to digest in someone else's book. So it's really kind of about ultimately what I feel in my own heart. So I have an ideal reader in mind for sure, but what she really is an extension of myself. And how would I be dealing with this story if I were reading it for the first time and if this were all new information for me? Does that even make sense?
That makes perfect sense, and
Good.
I love that. And I suppose as a marketer myself, I can hear that back. And often the best audiences are the ones that you understand the best, and you understand yourself.
Yes. Rory Baden says the person that you're helping is the earlier version of yourself. That's the person that you are most prepared to help and to offer entertainment or guidance to. So it's always about who I was and who I am and who I'm going to be.
We've talked about the editing process. We've talked about the writing process. Altogether, how long did everything take?
From idea to publication was 6 years, which is ridiculously long in some ways. So I've already explained that I stewed trying to get the plot right and the outline right. And when I finally had it, I started writing, say, in the month of March, and I finished my first draft in October. So all of the stewing, playing, considering, wondering, agonizing happened over a period of years. And then once I actually sat down to write with my outline, once I had that outline right, it just took a matter of months to get the book, which is about 100,000 words, a little shy of that, into actually written format. So again, it was just like laying all the groundwork. And then once my fingers actually hit the keyboard, it just started to flow. And I felt like that went remarkably quickly.
And you talked about that outline. So you had a written outline before you
Did.
started?
I did. That was one of the things that my publisher really encouraged. I am not someone who typically writes with an outline at all, and I feel like it's saved my neck for sure, because having that outline, I could at least write something and get it onto paper and then go back and fix it without staring at the screen and that flashing cursor and wondering, well, what am I going to say today? I have nothing to say. Instead, it's okay, just do the next step on your outline and just write it. Just let it be awful, get it on paper, go back and fix it later. So I'm all about outlines these days in my fiction writing for sure.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Can I just ask, this book was so fantastic. When or can I look forward to another one?
I love to see Abigail Carter is the female detective. She is the hero of the story, and she's a detective, so she deals with a lot of different cases. So I have another one in my mind. I would really like it to include someone being framed for something they didn't do. There's a lot of buzz in Colorado specifically about some anomalies that have come up with DNA testing, and the DNA tests themselves have not been 100% pure like we'd like. And so there are a number of cases that have to be reinvestigated and retried because of the anomalies with DNA. So I'd like it to involve some element of that from the headlines. So already the wheels are kind of turning to see what Abby does next in her detective career.
Oh, I can't wait. Exciting. And before we go, can you give me one big tip that you would give to any author listening to this podcast now? Perhaps somebody who hasn't started and they don't know where to start, what is the big takeaway, the big tip that you feel that from your heart you can pass on to help other people in a situation in which you've been in?
Yeah. Speaking from someone who gets hung up in my own head, I listen to the negativity that just kind of banters around in my own mind. What I would say to any author who's got an idea is to just start writing, just start doing it, and start sharing your ideas with someone else. Ultimately, this is your idea, and if you feel strongly about it, you write it no matter what anybody says. But once you start verbalizing the fact that you want to write a book, you've got the story in mind, and it's starting to take shape, and you'd really like to banter some ideas, all of a sudden now you have people who are cheering you on and encouraging you and telling you can, and it helps to diminish those negative voices that tend to play on repeat in our minds. So the sooner you can start actually doing the work and share the fact that you are doing the work, the sooner that project's going to come to fruition.
Perfect. Cathy, thank you very much. This was absolutely fascinating. And I look forward to the next one.